Uh, okay. And the next one, this is question number 3. And so what should I focus on at different stages? So this was interesting because not that many people, it was like worried about it a bit or often a concern. For me, this was a major concern several years back, and it sort of focused a lot of my thinking about assessment and teacher development. And I guess this was my big aha, was this idea of breaking it into the first third, the second third, and the final third of the course. And I'll talk to you guys about that today. Fourth one, passing standard. And again, this is it's been an interesting issue for me, thinking about, what's passing at different stages of the course. And I guess that relates also to expectations. This last one is sort of by the end of the course. And for me, this number 5, I actually do worry about this because I feel like one of the things that I'd like to see, personally, I'd like to see the S.I.T. course moving toward is a little bit more norming. Just the way we would grade essays in a writing program, that we come to an agreement. And I know S.I.T has done some work on that. And so I think that would be an interesting area to explore. Imagining something like we can see some videos, we get some videos uploaded onto a website or something, and then we can look at them and try to decide, how we would, what we would focus on, what their strengths are, what are areas to work on. Okay, the next one here, participants' ability to reflect. So this looked like a pretty big concern for people, and I definitely feel like this is a tricky one. Ultimately, I feel like I need to see participants demonstrate the skills. But I think the gray area is when they have something in the lesson plan, and then they don't do it, or when they come in right in feedback, and without any prompting or assistance, they tell you exactly what they needed to do, and they just nail it. So that there is a gray area there, but I do basically hope that I can see those skills. Question number 7, and this one I actually was a little relieved. I think this was a big issue a long time, some years back, but I think that for me personally, I would say no. I don't think every part of a lesson, especially if you're thinking of like week 4, that every part of the lesson has to be quote unquote good. I think that here, an example of this might be that somebody who's trying to do, say, a grammar lesson, and they get caught up in the practice and they don't get to their communicative task or their fluency task at the end. If I've seen them demonstrate a fluency task earlier in the course, I know that they know how to do it. And they can tell me in lesson planning or in feedback of, that, oh yeah, that I wanted to get there. Then we can talk about that. But that wouldn't be a deal breaker for me. So maybe just take a moment and just do a quick chat to your partner, and just anything that was a surprise for you or anything that was interesting. Okay. So I'd like to take a moment then, and Kevin, I was wondering if we could unmute just for a moment, and if you don't have any comments that you want to make right now, maybe just try to stay quiet so we don't get overwhelmed. But if you do have a comment, I'll try to moderate it a little bit. So, anybody want to say anything about the results that surprised them?
We're on?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is Ron. I think all of these, none of these are static. I think they're all moving parts. So it's hard to kind of codify really, what does it mean to worry a bit about how does that translate into action. I think is probably maybe that's where we're going.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of how we see a lesson. There's so many different aspects where you are in the course, where each participant is in his own progress in the course. I mean, I always say, we plan linearly, but we teach cyclically. We teach to where the students are at a given moment. That can be different for every participant. And I think, for example, if you have done an encounter, and I like to use ECRIF as the framework for the whole course. So everything is encountered in their different aspects of the different modules and the different objectives. But if you were to go to a session, for example, for me on giving instructions, the next time around it's not in the same place on ECRIF. It's maybe in the clarification stage, so it changes.
Mm. Yeah, I definitely could see that. Susan also had a comment here, and this is good. Susan, she texted me and said, hand raised. So I love that. Susan, do you want to make a comment?
Yeah, this is where I feel like one of the strengths of the S.I.T. course in particular is that we do have co-trainers and we have assessors come in so that we can kind of bounce these ideas off each other about whether we think that lesson is a passing lesson. But and I guess the other thing in relation to all the questions is that there is a process of planning for the lesson, performing or executing the lesson, and then reflecting on the lesson. So, this one that says, does every part of the lesson have to be good to be passing? Well, is there a way that we can say, well, it was planned for and it was reflected on, but it wasn't executed, so it wasn't good in the execution. So I think some of that, and maybe one question that could be in the SurveyMonkey is, are all three parts equal, or do we have heavier weight on the reflection, knowing that we're building reflective practitioners? Mm-hmm. That's all.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think we definitely on the S.I.T. course place a premium on reflection. So it is a tough balance, though. Yeah. Well, I don't see anybody else texting me with their hand up, so maybe I'll press on. And this is working pretty well so far. I hope everybody was able to get a little bit of a chat in. I can't monitor those because they're private. Let's go ahead and move on, and maybe Kevin will mute again, and I'll move here. Okay. So this next bit, I thought that to make it fun and make it a bit more real, we're going to actually watch a 2-minute clip from a lesson. This is just some poor dude that I found on YouTube, and I think he's in Korea. And it's about a 2-minute clip. So what I'm going to ask you to do is try to imagine that you're seeing this guy in a lesson, and it's only 2 minutes, but what would you focus on in feedback? And would this part of the lesson feel like it was passing to you? Let's see here. Okay. Oh, this little note here at the end, add video here. That was my note to myself, so sorry about that. Okay, so I'm going to play this, and I think, let's see if this works. Can you guys hear me? Somebody? Hopefully you'll be able to hear this.
Okay, what does number 1 say, Julia? Can you read number 1? Okay, do you think that's true? True? Yes? Okay. Who thinks it's true?
James asked about background. I just found this on YouTube, so it's just it seems like the guy's trying to do some sort of
I can't hear.
communication. Okay, so I'm going to keep playing it, and you guys can listen, and then when we're done, you'll have a chat with your partner.
Raise your hand. True. Who wrote true? Number 1. Okay, who thinks it's false? Okay, you're right. Anybody want to guess where am I from? Guess where am I from? Indonesia. How about you? England is in Europe. Alright, how about you? What do you think? Yes. Africa? South Africa? How about here? Where do you think I'm from? What? Canada? Okay, you're right. I'm from the USA. Number 2, I like to study. Who thinks it's true? Raise your hand. Who thinks it's false? Right? True? Okay. False. I have a cell phone. True or false? True. Who thinks it's no. True? False. Okay.
Okay, so I think that ends this little bit, this little clip. So again, just based on what you've seen so far, and I know he sort of chopped it out a little bit, but I imagine this would have been a 15 or 20 minutes activity. Does this feel passing to you? Why or why not? What is he doing that seems to be working, or that you think is effective and is more learning centered? And what do you think he's doing that maybe needs to be worked on, needs improvement? So again, I'll give you maybe 1 or 2 minutes to chat with your designated partner about that. Okay, go ahead. Okay, guys. So it's been a couple minutes here, so I'm going to move on, and hopefully you got a chance to check that out. For time's sake, I'm not going to do a whole share on this one because I feel like I do want to make sure that we get through, and I'm conscious of the time. It's about 1:35 now, so California time. So, based on what you've seen so far, would this lesson be passing? Why or why not? And so I think, this lesson falls into the realm of a communicative task, or I think that's what the guy was sort of going for. And this is something that we definitely focus on, I think, on the S.I.T. course. And I added, just for clarity's sake, some of the things that we use here in Berkeley. This idea that it's providing all students in the class a chance to communicate with each other through pair work, group work. So one thing that was clear with this guy was that he kept it very teacher-centered, and he was just calling on students. And so there was, as far as I could see, there was no student-student interaction. So the amount of individual speaking time was really minimal. In terms of Thornberry's criteria, this comes from How to Teach Speaking. Was there a communicative purpose? Yeah, there was. Excuse me. They had to sort of discern whether or not, where he was British or he was from South Africa or where he was from. So there was, this kind of catch the lie thing. Real time, yes. I mean, he was asking questions and the students did have to answer in real time, but the interaction was so minimal, as I mentioned before, that I think that's what would really be one of the areas that I would want to work on with this guy. The students did have freedom to use language, but because it was a whole class interaction, there was very, very little language that they actually produced. Also, I think in terms of interaction, because he kept it whole class, their guesses were not only were they short, but it was kind of risky. That one person said Europe, and then he kind of like went at them and said, no, London is in Europe or something like that. So it felt a little tense to me. I think if we look at like the effective teacher in terms of the participant record book on the S.I.T. TESOL certificate. So there are four main categories: interaction with and among students, managing activities and materials, and then focusing on target language and texts, and moving towards objectives. And then all of the course goal, these are sort of the four main course goals in terms of teaching, and then there's lots of objectives sort of under those. So I think for me, like with this guy, I think that he really needs to focus a lot on this interaction and managing, because we're not even going to get into focusing on target language or moving toward objectives until he can sort of let go and have the students talk to each other so that they can actually use the language. So let's move on here. If we're thinking about interacting, so these are some of the things that that we look for, in terms of that first question about focusing. So if I'm going to focus on interacting, and this is what I usually do sort of in the early parts of the course, in the stage one of the course, this idea here of tone, rapport, attitude, grading language, norms, classroom arrangement, student talk time, and then the interaction pattern. So these are the areas that I feel like this guy could really stand to work on. And I feel like before I would want to work with him on like, how to convey meaning of a word or on, the grammar or concept checking, I feel like this is the main thing to work on. Also managing. So he did have a clear task, were the students able to engage? Well, yes, he had a clear task, but because of the interaction, it was very minimal. And here students sorry. Students didn't have much opportunities to engage. The instructions were reasonably clear, but again, he was just calling on individuals. But he was able to use the board reasonably well and explain his, I guess I wouldn't call it modeling because he didn't really get the students doing anything. Let's move on though. So focusing, this would be were the students able to work with target language or text. Well, this lesson it didn't really apply, but we'll return to this in a little bit. This idea of actually focusing the students on target language or on text. And then moving, here again, it didn't really apply that much in this little bit because there was really only 2 steps. He did it alone and then he had them write. And then I think he was calling on them again. But moving is really focusing on objectives and sequencing and steps. Okay, so I mentioned before this idea of 3 stages. So we break up, again here in Berkeley, one of the things that we do is we break up the course into 3 stages. And the first one is the stage 1, which is in the first week or week and a half. So like on our course, the way we focus on that is we actually, the first practice teaching, we have the all of the participants and all of the ESL students work together, and the trainer leads a lesson in which there's a kind of one-on-one interview, and they fill out a little needs analysis chart. They ask each other questions. And right here, just having them do one-on-one, you can have the participants focusing on things like grading their language, slowing down, establishing rapport with students. We also then in stage 1, we do an activity that same evening, which is called Bag of Questions. And now the participants work with 3 or 4 students, and they each have a bag of questions based on topics like sports or travel. And then the idea is that the students draw questions from the bag, and they ask and answer these questions in the group. And so now the teacher or the participant is trying to facilitate more group discussion. And here again, they can really focus on all of these stage 1 interaction and managing issues. And we have a lot of ahas come out from participants at this point where they realize that when they hold on to the bag, the questions all die or the conversation dies. And I think this is really key because we are very clear to them and say, your job is to get the students talking using this bag of questions activity. You're not to teach anything. You're not to sort of do anything other than just get them talking. And so it really helps them focus on or work on this interaction and then managing. Stage 2 is it basically starts somewhere in the speaking module, sort of at the end of the speaking module for us. And basically what we have them do is start to do like a 15-minute lesson on vocabulary, which I think is one of the easier ways to do a productive skills or an ECRIF lesson. Then we also have them work on a PDP lesson with the listening module. And here, we're just kind of looking for, okay, do they have the basic flow? And stage 3 is really when you sort of get into the grammar module and the reading module, and you're hoping that the participants are really starting to fine-tune their activities, that they've got stage 1 and stage 2 skills down. They've got sort of the interaction and management, not perfect or something, but they've had some success with that. They've had some success with basic sequencing, and now they can really start to fine-tune. So here again, stage 1 focuses on the interaction and managing. Stage 2, you get a focus on target language and texts and moving toward objectives. And in stage 3, you're trying to integrate all of them. So let me take a moment here and let's do a quick chat and just to check in with your partner. And then if somebody has a clarifying question, you can raise your hand via the chat box. So, okay, I'll give you a couple minutes to talk. Okay. So if you'd like to make any kind of comments or questions or ask any questions, maybe you can text me and then I'll know. If I can call on you and you can then turn on your mic. Susan has her hand up. Susan, can you chime in? Okay, maybe just turn on your mic.
Yeah, so I really like this idea, in relation to what I've seen with your work with Lyuna and this idea of kind of moving the cheese, so to speak, in terms of showing that they can do different things at different stages of the course. And I wonder if this kind of thing, as you're talking about norming, Josh, I feel like that's where question number 3 or 4 or whatever it was is, would this lesson be evaluated similarly from one trainer to another based on kind of our norms in what we're expecting at each level? So maybe, I guess I'm only saying that this kind of webinar, I think, really helps us to pool our ideas about these expectations, and if Kevin's there too, that idea that we've got some kind of agreement along these lines, and maybe you've already kind of talked to Kevin about how you break it into 3 stages and how participants show you they move through those stages, and that's
right.
all.
Yeah, well, I think one of the things for me is this, when you break it into the stages too, that you can make it clear what the participants need to work on, and it's also helpful because you can sort of communicate with other trainers about where participants are at. So sometimes we get participants on the S.I.T. TESOL Cert that are very experienced, and they really are well past stage 1, and now they're actually just fine-tuning their interaction and management. But you want to get them into that stage 2 and stage 3. And other times you'll get people who are super developed in terms of their language and their ability to focus on language, but they're so teacher-centered in that. So then you really want to back it up and get them working on stage one. Because, you know, stage one, setting up a communicative task is so critical for a grammar lesson, a listening lesson, a reading lesson. It's all there. And so that's why I think it's such a fundamental place to start in terms of moving people toward learning-centered teaching. Anybody else have their hand up or would like to talk? James has a question here asking if all sites are using the new record book, which has the 4 bullet points and the main competencies. Kevin says they should be. Good. Okay. I don't see any other hands right now, so I'll kind of move on ahead. It's about 1:51 our time, so we have about 9 minutes. Oh, Ron has his hand up. Okay, Ron, go ahead. You should just click on your micro.
Hear me now?
Yeah, now I hear you.
I kind of like to think in terms of 3s as well. We have the planning of a lesson, we have the implementation or teaching the lesson, and reflection. And, you know, when we evaluate whether a participant should pass or not, sometimes we balance those off against one another. You know, the teacher who can maybe has some flaws in his teaching but can reflect really well and really nail why, what went well or didn't go well, you know, is one we feel may pass, as opposed to maybe the student who doesn't make any progress and kind of static and can't reflect. It seems to me there's kind of a criteria that kind of floats back and forth between those 3. And another thing too, getting back to whether the participant is actually able to finish the lesson with the fluency activity. If they did not get to the fluency activity because they made the right reflection in action decisions, and they say, well, these students need more practice, or they need to extend this activity a little longer, and that's the reason they didn't, and they see this reflection, then that plays a part for me in making the judgment in terms of where they are in their progress and abilities and whether or not they pass the course.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Yeah, thank you for that. Just to respond a little bit, and I think, Ron, you'll need to turn off your mic again. So just to respond to that, I think that, you know, it does end up being a little bit of an accounting technique, you know. So when I've seen, and this is part of the reason that I like to do that communicative task early on, because if I've seen somebody successfully do a communicative task in week 1, then I know that they can do it. And so the fact that they planned it in their stage, you know, at stage 3, but they didn't get to it, or they messed it up because they get so focused on trying to work on the language or trying to work on the sequence, that then their communicative task falls out. Well, I know that they can do it. So they've demonstrated the skill. And I think that that's the critical piece for me, is that I don't want to be in the position of having to guess, you know, or sort of go, I think they could probably do this. I have that feeling. And I don't want to do that. I want to have evidence in front of me to know whether or not somebody is passing. So if they've done a communicative task and I've seen it, then okay, yeah. And maybe they haven't put it all together yet. But as Ron mentions, you know, they're able to reflect. They come back and they go, well, I felt like the students needed more practice, and so I didn't do this fluency activity I had planned. Okay, that makes sense. I've seen you do it, so I know that you can do it. But here again, I think with the 4 categories that are on the screen, it's about demonstrating those. And maybe, you know, somebody who's a really strong pass puts them all together. Other people, it may be a little bit scattered, but we're looking for evidence. And I think this is one of the critical things, is going through and trying to find examples. So I want to spend the last few minutes sort of reviewing this. So let's see here. So again, stage 1, interaction and managing. So one of the things that we do actually here in Berkeley is these categories or these little points that I've got here, we actually put these on a little cheat sheet for ourselves on the bottom of our observation task or observation notes. So we'll put these there, and then as I'm watching that stage 1 lesson, it helps me focus. So literally, I've got it on I use my computer, I use Microsoft Word, and I have these guys, these bulleted points at the bottom, and as I'm watching the lesson and I'm taking my time notes, I will scroll down and go, oh yeah, totally establishing rapport, and I might actually grab that and move it into a box that says that was a strength, and then that'll be sort of the beginning of my note to the participant. But maybe they really didn't have a very motivating communicative task. It was like talk about your family, which there was a chance, but maybe they could have tweaked that task to make it more interesting, like find out similarities between you and your partner's family, or list 5 members of your family and ask your partner about these 5 people, something like that. Maybe the instructions weren't so clear, so I throw that into like, this is an area to work on. So this helps me sort of sort through, and then I can share that with the participants. And I also share it with them before the lesson, like, this is what we're working on now, getting the students speaking, doing a communicative task.